Georgia continues to be the center of the nation's political universe, and we here at Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com are committed to continuing to bring you the most up-to-date coverage of politics, not only in Georgia but across the nation and how they affect the Peach State. I'm Tim Darnell. Welcome to this week's edition of Political Update. Here are some of the headlines that we're following right now. First of all, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Georgia on Thursday, today, visiting Northwest Georgia, the community of Dalton, where she is touring a Q-Cell solar manufacturing plant and expected to announce what is really a historic order for 2.5 million solar panels to be delivered from a community in our home state of Georgia that is really becoming the nation's #1 top producing manufacturer of solar power and solar producing materials. Georgia is really at the forefront and is rapidly becoming more of a worldwide leader, not only national but worldwide in terms of solar manufacturing and green energy production. Vice President Harris is touring the facility, and it will probably affect a little bit of folks' traffic coming home during the rush hour, but it is an exciting day for Northwest Georgia and the community of Dalton. Our second headline this week occurred a couple of days ago when Marjorie Taylor Greene was at the forefront of a rally in Manhattan, near only a few blocks away where former President Donald Trump became the first ex-American president in history to be indicted on criminal charges. Marjorie Taylor Greene held a rally only a couple of hours before the former president's arrest and arraignment and formal indictment and release from custody. The rally was very chaotic. She was shouted down by a number of anti-Trump supporters. I believe reports had she was only at her rally for less than 10 minutes before she had to be escorted by New York City Police Departments, by the NYPD, from the rally for her own safety. That also leads us into our third and one of our most prominent headlines from this past week, when Donald Trump was formally arraigned on 34 counts, felony counts, of falsifying business records in relation to an alleged 2016 affair he had with Stephanie Clifford, aka Stormy Daniels, and also allegedly an ex-Playboy model named Karen McDougal. These were initially could be classified as misdemeanors, but Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has upped all of the indictments to include 34 felony counts. Donald Trump becomes the first American president in U.S. history to face criminal indictments. And our final headline, I believe I may have gotten these a little bit out of order, but you'll bear with me today. Clarence Thomas, a report came out from a nonprofit organization called ProPublica. Clarence Thomas is alleged to have accepted a number of unreported luxury donations from a very prominent Republican supporter and donor in Dallas, Texas, named Harlan Crow. Thomas's office and the Supreme Court has not commented on these, but the report that came out on Thursday morning from ProPublica, an organization that is a media outlet committed to reporting alleged abuses of power, reports that these luxury vacations, including trips on private jets and luxury yachts, California resorts, and resorts in the Adirondack, all belonging to Harlan Crow, were unreported and is really unprecedented in American judicial and jurisprudence history. Those are some of our top headlines, and I want to welcome into our broadcast studios Andrew Fleischman, who is a partner with the Atlanta-based attorneys Sessions and Fleischman. And Andrew, probably what I should have done was go in kind of a little bit of a reverse order, but let's kind of take a step back to one of our previous headlines. That is the indictment, arrest, arraignment, subsequent release of Donald Trump on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. I just want to ask you right off the bat, what are the chances of this ever going to trial?
It's hard to say. There are like 9 different New York ways that you could dismiss something like this, including that it doesn't allege a crime or that in the interest of justice the case ought to be dismissed. And it's hard to know what the chances are. But to the extent that those things are discretionary, yelling at the judge, screaming at the judge makes those things less likely. On top of that, you got all the delays that can happen. Now, New York does not have what you call an interlocutory or pretrial appeal for criminal defendants. You typically have to go through the process. But there are complicated ways around this, and Mr. Trump has a good legal team, so he might find a way to make that happen.
You mentioned yelling at the judge, shouting at the judge. I believe Judge Marchand did instruct. He did not refer to as former President Donald Trump. I believe the indictments formally say Donald John Trump, of not criticizing or demeaning the judge, the court system, the prosecutors, and yet, as former President Trump is often wont to do, did exactly that, criticize the entire legal proceedings from a nationally televised address from his Mar-a-Lago home in Palm Beach, Florida. What are the chances of any blowback on the former president for this kind of conduct?
I mean, pretty slim. You know, the judge already recognizes this is an unprecedented case, and so do anything extra like a contempt finding, likely just to make things worse, especially if he's worried about bomb threats, that sort of thing. On top of that, a gag order, something ordering the parties not to go talk further about the case. I mean, the judge can try to issue one, but that creates further opportunities for delay. There's a lot of First Amendment problems with telling parties not to talk about a case. And you have all the complication of picking up on it, right? So how do you know whether to attribute to Trump something that his supporters have said? For that reason, I think he's going to keep talking, and there's not going to be any consequences for him.
He will keep talking. The indictments continually refer repeatedly to allegations that the former president committed these alleged business falsification charges in order to further the committance of another crime, and yet the indictments don't specify that crime. Apparently, because New York state law doesn't require that, why would the DA, Alvin Bragg, not specify those crimes, further future crimes in those indictments?
Because by specifying which crimes he meant, he opens the opportunity for Trump to move to dismiss based on the theory. So, for instance, whether or not it's a campaign fraud violation. Okay, well, if he alleges that, then Trump is going to argue that federal campaign finance laws preempt this. The DOJ already decided not to prosecute on that. It opens that possibility. Also, prosecutors, and especially New York prosecutors, really relish the ability to amend their charges or change them over time. And so, giving that up without a fight is not something Alvin Bragg is likely to do. That being said, Trump's legal team has 30 days from arraignment to file what's called a bill of particulars. That means, hey, listen, you got to specify what you're charging, give me more details. The prosecutor will likely fight back and say he doesn't want to comply with that. The judge will probably issue an order. So even though in theory the next hearing is in December, I anticipate a lot of stuff is going to happen before then.
And what will happen in December?
It's actually really hard to say because we won't know if the case will even still be around in December. Before that point, I imagine we're going to have motions to dismiss, we're going to have motions to suppress, we're going to have bills of particulars, arguments over discovery, protective orders from the judge, gag orders. There's going to be a million things that happen before December, and so by the time we get there, I don't know what the lay of the land is going to be like.
Obviously, we all know that Fulton County District Attorney Bonnie Willis has been investigating the former president for almost a year now, 11 months. I believe it was last May that the special grand jury was seated, and yet we have been told that indictments are imminent, not journalistically imminent, but perhaps judicially imminent. How does all of this that's happening in New York affect what's happening in Fulton County, or does it even affect us here?
I mean, outside of some scheduling concerns, I don't see much effect. I mean, it certainly does dull the political benefit to Fani Willis of going after the president, right? I mean, she's in a Democratic city. She was elected as a sort of reform prosecutor. That's what she went for after Paul Howard. And so having someone else scoop her on this probably means she gets less political benefit, less airtime than she otherwise would.
Bonnie Willis was mentioned by name. I don't believe Donald Trump mentioned her Tuesday night or earlier this week from his Mar-a-Lago address, but speech rather. But he did mention the Fulton County District Attorney. She has been, subjected to a lot of abuse and criticism and praise from different sectors of the political spectrum. Do you have any sense as to when or even if she will issue any indictments in her special grand jury investigation?
Well, the special grand jury itself can't issue an indictment, but whether she'll issue an indictment from the grand jury, I suspect it's going to happen. I can't tell you when. There is an epidemic problem in Fulton County of people not being indicted, and the president's case is a particularly thorny and complicated one, so lots of potential reasons for delay.
It seems like all of the criminal indictments issued by Alvin Bragg in New York were reported or had a kind of a direct correlation to business falsification records or disclosures, and that leads us really into the other topic that's really breaking today, and that is that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is alleged to have unreportedly accepted a series of luxury vacations to a number of private resorts by a Dallas businessman and a very prominent and wealthy Republican donor, Harlan Crow. Tell us a little bit about what these allegations entail and whether or not Clarence Thomas is required under the law to report these kind of luxury vacation donations, if you will.
Well, there was a recent amendment to the Supreme Court rules that may have influenced how we got this information. But, it's really interesting. This all goes back to a 2015 case called Caperton v. Massey, where sort of evil coal magnate Don Blankenship paid $3 million for a judicial re-election campaign. It came out that one of the judges in West Virginia had been flown to the French Riviera on his behalf. That guy recused. But then there was a remaining judge, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, this is recusable. This is $3 million. This is the appearance of impropriety. Due process requires it. Before that point, due process had only required recusal when you had like a family member out in front of you or you got a direct financial benefit, as when judges got $15 for returning a slave to his owner and $5 for not. So this was a sort of a thing. But the interesting part about it is that Justice Thomas was in dissent, along with Scalia and Roberts. And the current Supreme Court of the United States likely would not have backed this conclusion because they thought that this was too vague a rule, hard to know when you ran afoul of it. I'm not sure under current Supreme Court precedent whether what he did is even recusable, or whether he violated those rules. It should be interesting to find out.
Now, ProPublica has made it a point to mention, and they did reach out to Mr. Crow in Dallas, and he says he has acknowledged that Justice Thomas has accompanied him on a number of luxury vacations to some very opulent places, California, Texas, New York, as well as on his luxury yacht and private jet, but that neither Mr. Crow or any of his friends or associates asked or requested Justice Thomas for any judicial assistance or interpretation of any court-related issues, and Justice Thomas has not offered those as in return for those. Are we looking at simply a matter of semantics, or is there any real issue going on here?
There's an important distinction there whether or not he was a party ever in front of the judge, right? Because judges are allowed to have friends, even rich, powerful, generous friends. And while, I have to sort of guess that maybe he never got a benefit for it, it's tricky. Abe Fortas in the 60s, he received a $20,000 fund for life for acting as a legal consultant to a guy who was charged with finance crimes. And that was enough to get him to resign. This seems distinct. He wasn't asking for his legal advice. This was allegedly out of friendship. And because of that distinction, I think it's unlikely that Justice Thomas is going to face any serious blowback for this. Not an impeachment proceeding because the House is controlled by Republicans, and most likely not even any serious ethical inquiry.
Yeah, and in terms of impeachment, we were looking at some of the headlines before we went on air today. I've seen editorials already calling for his impeachment. Are Supreme Court justices and judicial officials subject to the same rules and regulations in terms of disclosure that candidates for public office are?
To my knowledge, no. They have distinct requirements, and also, of course, oversight is difficult, right? These are life appointments. We are a long way from the 19th century when you would stick someone on the Supreme Court as a punishment. It's a very powerful position without a lot of accountability, and for that reason, there's probably very little keeping Justice Thomas from staying in his post, if he wants to.
And the reason we're covering this issue is obviously Clarence Thomas, having sat on the Supreme Court since 1991, is a Georgia native from tiny Pinpoint, Georgia, a really true rags to riches story, and was appointed by George H.W. Bush to the court in 1991. We are wrapping up this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First. Thanks to Andrew Fleischman, partner in the Atlanta-based law firm of Sessions and Fleischman. Thanks all of you for continuing to join us here on Atlanta News First and Political Update.